This is Face the State with Rob Hanrahan and the political insiders Tony May and Charlie Giroux.
Good morning. Welcome to Face the State. I'm Rob Hanrahan. This week we have Representative Keith Gillespie as our guest, the 47th District in New York. Thanks again for being on the program once again. We're going to talk budget. Now, I want to hammer down here on your four bills that surround property tax, because I found it fascinating the more I read up about it. But you're starting with the Constitution, essentially. So tell me about phase one, bill number one.
Okay, well, great. Well, first of all, Rob, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with your viewers. It's great to be back again. And obviously, it's very important here to be able to discuss this four-bill package that we're about to introduce. And as you so aptly said, before we can go anywhere, we actually are looking at two constitutional amendments. One dealing with the uniformity clause, in that the bills that we're introducing will separate residential property taxes from commercial and industrial property taxes. Commercial and industrial will continue to pay property taxes, and the residential will be exempt or eliminated as a result of this legislation.
So it's my understanding that under the way the law is now, under the Constitution, if you eliminated property taxes for residents, commercial properties would also be eliminated?
Well, you would have to do that unless we address the
it.
Constitution because of the uniformity clause.
Okay, so that's your Bill 1317.
Correct. And the other component of the constitutional amendment is the hold harmless provision. Now, really what got us into this mess back in 1991, particularly here in south central Pennsylvania, up in the Poconos and a couple of other areas of the state, was they changed the funding formula. And what happened from that day forward, with the exception of a little bit for inflation, school districts got the same amount of money that they had gotten the previous year. Now, that worked fine for school districts that had decreasing enrollment. Okay, they had less kids than the previous year, but yet they got the same amount of money.
Right.
Now, for areas like south central Pennsylvania, and I know you've lived here in this area for a while, what used to be a farm is now a housing development, which equates to usually a couple of kids in the house, and which involves more schools, more teachers, et cetera, to run the thing. But yet we're getting the same amount of money in 2017 that we got in 1991, with the exception of a little bit of factor for inflation. So,
but yet schools where enrollment has declined, they're also getting the same amount of money.
Yeah, and so therein lies the problem. That, you know, with I hear from my colleagues in this part of the area, Rob, why aren't you guys doing anything? Well, the parts of the state where they're getting the same amount of money for less kids and property taxes are not an issue, they don't want to gore their ox to help us down here in south central Pennsylvania. So that's been a big part of the fight. And in order for us to move forward with this thing, we have to address the hold harmless provision. So that is bill number two, if you will, that in addition to the uniformity clause, to make it residential only. Because quite frankly, a lot of my colleagues, Rob and your listeners, think that commercial industrial properties should pay property taxes as a part of doing business. And for them to be exempt, it's actually about a $4 billion deal that's going to help with the bill package that we've put in to make it work.
All right, let's talk about school construction. That's phase three, and you have an idea on how to sort of standardize this, because when they go to build a school, obviously whoever's building it wants to add all the bells and whistles they can, but yet tell me about your plan and how this bill would kind of streamline that.
You've obviously done your homework. This bill would give a couple of options for school districts to decide if they want to build a new school. As you well noted, it's not going to be the a la carte thing with all the bells and whistles and these Taj Mahals that have built in some parts of the state. We're going to come up with a design for the 6 different regions of the state, and that takes into account environmental conditions, weather, student enrollment, geographics, et cetera. And they would get their choice of one of 4 plans. So all the architectural, legal, and engineering fees have been consolidated, and that's a big cost savings to the taxpayers in the Commonwealth. If they elect to go beyond that, they're going to be eligible to not receive their state funding that would normally be associated with building a new school. So it's going to be a real cost savings to the taxpayers.
Okay, so those 3, then you add the final piece of the package involves the necessary funding sources, and this essentially is calling for the residential property tax to be eliminated, which would shift the majority of funds collected as property taxes to being collected as sales and income taxes, and I think that will be your toughest push uphill.
Well, actually, the feedback that I've gotten from either surveys, town hall meetings, et cetera, throughout my district is people are very much in favor of paying a little bit more in a personal income tax and a sales tax in order to totally eliminate school property taxes. This is cutting the head off the snake, and they're no longer going to be faced with these $4,000, $5,000, $10,000, $12,000 bills, depending on where they may be. Yes, this is the way we're going to fund it. We're going to take the personal income tax that is currently at 3.07 to 4.5%, and take the sales tax from 6% to 7% and add it to food and clothing.
And then you make up the difference that way.
It does make up the difference, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because before we introduced this bill, and there's been a number of other proposals that have been bannered and tossed around and voted on since I got there 14 years ago. And many times people will argue that they're coming up $2 billion short. So when I went to the appropriations to the finance people before we introduced these bills, I said, look, I want something that works. I don't want a maybe, I don't want a possible, I want to make sure that it works. So they crunched the numbers, and they assured me that with taking it from 6% to 7% and putting those items on that had been previously excluded, that these numbers will work. And again, one of the big caveats is leaving industrial and commercial property as it is.
All right, so you got these four, you're going to introduce these four in motion. They're not going to be easy to get through, and in fact the constitutional ones have to go through twice, right?
They do.
How do you feel about the odds of getting this whole package moving? I know the wheels up at the Capitol don't always move quickly when it comes to money.
Well, they don't, and it's frustrating. But I can say this unequivocally, that since I walked in the door 14 years ago, I think the synergy and the energy towards property tax exposure, relief, exclusion, elimination has been more of the forefront now than it was when I first walked in. I really feel that it's there. I tend to be an optimistic person. I don't think I'm moving overly optimistic on this. Whether it's my plan, whether it's Senate Bill 76, House Bill 76, or some of the other things that have been discussed, I do feel that in this session that we're going to get something done.
So for a regular family, like let's say mine, if I'm not paying property taxes on my house, but I'm paying more in income and sales tax, am I going to come out on the losing end of that? Or am I going to actually
I guess it
save
depends
some
how.
money?
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
Or would I actually save some money?
I think you're going to save some money. You know, depending on how much clothing you buy. Now, obviously, you're on television here and probably have to buy a new suit.
Not much, really. But
buy a new suit. You know, you have a youngster that needs clothing. Married, maybe your wife tends to buy something. You know,
I'm not allowed to get into that.
Your food.
Go into that.
Well, I'm not going
Yes,
to get into
you're
it
right.
either. But your food, yes, that's going to be a thing. But that's the trade-off. We're all pulling the wagon versus just the property tax owners funding the school have been pulling the wagon for the longest time. And I think this spreads it out. For those that are going to say it's a regressive tax and that you're being tough on the poor, there are a number of programs in place for those individuals that are in that situation, whether it be food stamps or SNAP or access cards, et cetera. There's a lot of programs out there for those that are indeed in a poverty.
Well, will those programs be there after the president introduced his budget this week, which called for a lot of cuts to those programs?
Well, again, we'll have to wait and see what the final
wrench
product
thrown
is.
into the system right there this week.
Yeah. Right now, I am going forward with the numbers that we've had crunched and a plan that works, and that's the direction that I want to take.
All right, I like the plan, and thank you for explaining it to everybody, and we will continue with Representative Keith Gillespie. You're watching Face the State right here on CBS 21. The Political Insiders weigh in next. We'll be right back.
This is Face the State with Rob Hanrahan and the Political Insiders Tony May and Charlie Giroux.
All right, the gang's all here, and so is Representative Keith Gillespie of the 47th District. Thank you again for being our guest. And Tony, we'll start with you, and I think you want to turn the attention to health care.
You were a former hospital administrator, so while we have the advantage of having you here with your expertise, the Congressional Budget Office just scored the Republican health care plan in Congress that's now in the Senate for consideration. Says it will still have 23 million people tossed off of health protections. What's your estimate of the bill, and is it something that's going to be good or bad for health care in central Pennsylvania?
Well, Tony, thanks for letting me be part of the gang here. My read on it is the Senate, from what I'm hearing, is going to take up a totally different bill.
Completely different, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm hearing coming from from the federal side. So I really wouldn't want to go out and say what it could or could possibly not be until they act, and then when indeed they do act, if it goes to a conference committee or whatever their version of that would be, then I think we need to get into wade into the weeds and the details associated with it.
Charlie.
I want to come back to the topic at hand, which is property tax, because when you and Rob were talking about property tax, it struck me that what you're really talking about is the school property tax, not county property taxes or local property taxes. And in my judgment, part of the reason is because schools across the state, many of them have very large reserves, including ones in York County, that are taxpayers' money that they're not spending, while at the same time constantly squeezing taxpayers for additional money. How do you resolve that problem?
Well, and thank you for pointing that out, Charlie, that this does not affect your county or local taxes, the plan that we're submitting.
You'd still have property taxes.
You're still going to have property taxes based on it, but one of them's a 900-pound gorilla and the other one's, I guess, a 100-pound monkey, if you will. Certainly the county and the local taxes. You have another analogy?
We were just going along.
I just read something about a 100-pound monkey the other day that really need to go on a diet, but we've really digressed. Anyway, clearly, I'd say 70% of a typical property owner taxes are school taxes versus the county and the local taxes. Regarding the reserves, some of them have, the schools, my understanding, have held back to help fund the pension due costs that are associated with that, or they want to have a rainy day fund for construction or just an emergency stash going forward. If indeed some of the reserves are far beyond what one would deem acceptable, then that should be returned to the taxpayers.
Yeah, do you think there should be a cap on how much they can reserve?
Yeah, I do think there should be a cap.
Would it be a percentage based on the district, or?
There's a good piece of legislation for you to work on, because some of those numbers have gotten out of control.
Yeah, I certainly would like to talk to you off camera to find out specifically which schools we might be addressing, and if indeed that's the case, a cap or something going into the fact. I mean, the taxpayers are continually being asked to give more and more, and if this is sitting in an account somewhere and not being dispersed and just sitting there stagnant, then that's not fair to them.
Tony.
As long as we're getting into the weeds on the property tax bill that you've introduced.
Yep.
What would be done with rental properties and farms? How are they treated?
Farms would be part of the, any residential commercial farm, or excuse me, any residential or farm real estate would be eliminated with this plan.
Farms are covered. So I have, let's say I have a duplex house and I
Yep.
rent out half of it. Is half of it taxed, half not taxed?
No, they would both be tax-free.
I guess what Tony's getting at, if you run a business out of your house,
Well,
it's your residence. If you have a farm, you live on that farm, it's a residence.
Yes, farmstead as we would call it.
Let me ask the practical question here, Representative. As you know, passing constitutional amendments is not easy, because not only do they have to go through two separate sessions of the General Assembly, they then have to go before the voters. And Tony remembers probably better than any of us, in 1989, the last big property tax plan that went to the voters, and every group in Harrisburg was for it, and the taxpayers shot it down by the biggest margin in the history of the Commonwealth. What's the likelihood that these constitutional amendments get through and actually become part of the Constitution?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, and as I said earlier, I'm an optimist. I look at things as the glass half full. Given I think the aura and the flavor of what's going on in the General Assembly right now, if there was ever going to be a time to do it, now's the time to do it. My goodness, I'm not going to sit on my hands and say, well, oh gosh, this is going to be tough. This is going to be a tough ask, or chances are we're not going to get to constitutional amendment because there hasn't been one done since the 60s. I'm not doing my job if I at least don't try to get something into play and advocate and push for it as strong as I can to try to get it done.
Tony?
We were talking earlier before the program about our Congressman Scott Perry. One of the things that's going on in Washington is President Trump wants to slash funding for the Chesapeake Bay and Susquehanna River cleanup. Have you talked to Scott Perry about that yet, keeping that funding?
I have not, and I happen to sit on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. We are drafting letters to send to the congressional appropriations folks regarding getting that funding restored. We've come a long way, and if any of the three of you have ever spent any time in the Chesapeake Bay, I think you can see in the last few years how it really has made a dramatic comeback. In fact, the grading has gone up to now to a C. You know, people may think a C is not the best, but it's certainly better than what it had been. years. I mean, we'll never see the day when John Smith arrived on his boat and you could literally walk across fish's backs to get from one side of the bay to the other. But we have made milestones and leaps with what we've done with the cleanup, and I would advocate for that, not only with my participation on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, but also as a resident of the area.
Quick political question, Representative. The Democrat National Convention got $10 million of the taxpayers' money to put on their convention in Philadelphia last year, and when it was all said and done, they had some money left over. And rather than returning it to the taxpayers, they divvied it up among staff people, including a $300,000 plus bonus for the head guy there. Two of your friends from York County, Eugene D. Pasquale, the Auditor General, and Tom Wolf, the Governor, have said they've got problems with that. Which Republican is going to lead the way in saying that should never have been done, give the money back?
Well, I believe I heard that the Judiciary Committee is attempting to bring former Governor Rendell in, who I believe had something to do with the convention, and ask for testimony and a hearing regarding that. I'm sure that probably there's a long line of Republicans that would want to join
There's a good issue for you.
Auditor General tonight. I don't know, I'm at the ring on the other side here with all your great suggestions, but
So you taking notes?
I stand with Governor Wolf and my friend Eugene Pasquale and calling for what's going on here.
I know you wanted to bring up, you're the majority chairman of the House Game and Fisheries Commission, and you also wanted to talk a little bit about chronic wasting disease, which is a serious threat right now to the deer population in the state, although I seem to see more and more deer between here and my house than I have in years. But tell me about that. What's the concern there?
Well, chronic wasting disease is unfortunately has been in the United States now for decades, and we started hearing about it a few years ago down in West Virginia and Maryland, which border the southwestern part of the state. You know, we don't have a border wall. It's just a matter of time is when these things are going to cross over. I don't think we're going to build one for the deer, though. You know, when we talk, depending on how much I can get into detail on chronic wasting disease, that may be the only way to stop it, because it's not a bacteria, it's not a virus, it's actually a protein. And these prions live in the soil, and they're excreted by deer with the contaminated deer by feces, urine, and saliva. And the only way to kill it and eradicate it is to burn the dirt at a very high temperature for an extended period of time. So we're not going to set Pennsylvania on fire and burn it into a coal, even the ones that cross your the road in front of you. But it would be devastating. I mean, we have close to 1 million licensed hunters, and the majority of them are deer hunters. And the economic stimulus and boom as a result of hunters going out, whether it's buying weapons or eating in the local restaurants or the hotels or their hunting camps, etc. If we were to lose the Pennsylvania white-tailed deer as a result of chronic wasting disease, it would be absolutely catastrophic. In addition to that, we have an elk herd that would also be susceptible.
This is a sort of like mad cow disease for deer.
It's very similar to that. It's a neurological disorder that just it literally wastes them away to nothing. It's still into nothing but skin and
Got to get to a break. My producer is telling me, got to get to a break. Thank you, Keith Gillespie, Representative 47th District, back with R.J. Harris after this.
Thank you.